You think you know Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick's dark comedy masterpiece about nuclear annihilation, political madness, and the absurdity of mutually assured destruction. For 6 decades, this film has been celebrated as brilliant satire, a Cold War time capsule that dared to laugh at the apocalypse. But the historical record reveals a production far more disturbing than the satirical surface suggests. And once you understand what was really happening while Kubrick's cameras rolled in 1963, you will never watch this film the same way again. What Kubrick created wasn't just political satire. It was a documentary about institutional insanity filmed while the world stood closer to nuclear war than at any moment before or since. The story begins in January 1963 at Shepperton Studios outside London. But here's what film historians rarely mention. While Kubrick was filming scenes about accidental nuclear war, the Pentagon was updating actual protocols for launching a preemptive nuclear strike. The comedy wasn't exaggeration. It was barely satire at all. Number 20, the consultant who knew too much. Kubrick hired Herman Kahn, a research and development corporation nuclear strategist, as technical advisor. Kahn had written a book titled On Thermonuclear War that calmly discussed acceptable casualties in a nuclear exchange using terms like megadeaths. 30 million dead was, in his analysis, a tolerable outcome if it prevented 50 million deaths. When Kahn arrived at Shepperton Studios in February 1963, he carried classified documents about actual nuclear war plans. He spent 3 days explaining to Kubrick exactly how many people would die in various attack scenarios, the specific cities that would be targeted first, the fallout patterns, the decades-long environmental consequences. Kubrick listened to all of it, taking detailed notes. Then he asked Kahn one question. If you were designing a doomsday device, how would you do it? Kahn didn't hesitate. He outlined the precise specifications. Kubrick used them for the film. Years later, Kahn admitted that every technical detail about the doomsday machine in Dr. Strangelove was based on weapon systems that actually existed or were under active development in 1963. Number 19, the actor who didn't know it was comedy. Slim Pickens was cast as Major Kong, the B-52 pilot who rides the nuclear bomb to its target. Kubrick deliberately didn't tell Pickens the film was satire. He was instructed to play it completely straight, as if he were starring in a serious military drama. Pickens, a former rodeo clown who specialized in westerns, approached the role with genuine patriotic sincerity. When he delivered the iconic speech about nuclear combat, toe-to-toe with the Ruskies, he believed he was inspiring his crew for a heroic mission. The other actors were instructed not to break the illusion. Between takes, when Pickens would discuss his character's motivation, they nodded seriously and never laughed. Pickens didn't realize he was in a comedy until he attended the premiere in January 1964. He sat in the theater as the audience roared with laughter at his performance. Afterward, he confronted Kubrick in the lobby. You made me look like a fool. No, Kubrick's response was characteristically blunt. You made the character believable. That's why it's funny. Pickens never fully forgave him. Number 18, the set that copied classified locations. Production designer Ken Adam created the War Room set based on classified information about actual Pentagon command centers that he legally should not have possessed. Adam had connections in British intelligence from his service during World War II. Those connections provided him with detailed descriptions of the underground Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, the circular table, the massive wall displays, the ambient lighting designed to reduce eye strain during extended crisis sessions. When the film premiered, Pentagon officials were horrified. Several congressmen demanded investigations into how Adam had obtained specifications for classified facilities. The inquiries went nowhere because nobody could prove exactly what he had seen. But former Strategic Air Command officers who visited the set during production were stunned by its accuracy. One colonel reportedly said the only thing missing was the coffee machine. The War Room in Dr. Strangelove wasn't fantasy. It was reconstruction of America's actual nuclear command center, built on a soundstage where anyone could walk through it. Number 17, the script that predicted reality. While Kubrick was filming in April 1963, an American B-52 bomber on airborne alert near Greenland experienced an electrical malfunction that armed its nuclear weapons without crew input. The fail-safe systems designed to prevent accidental launches failed. For 11 minutes, that aircraft carried live nuclear bombs in a ready-to-drop configuration while the crew frantically worked to disarm them. The incident was classified top secret and not revealed to the public until 1980. But here's the disturbing part. The exact scenario appeared in Kubrick's script, which had been finalized in December 1962. Kubrick had imagined a technical malfunction causing accidental nuclear weapons arming. 4 months later, it actually happened. When military analysts finally saw Dr. Strangelove, several recommended it be classified because it too accurately depicted vulnerabilities in nuclear command and control systems. The recommendation was rejected because the film was already in theaters. You can't classify something the public has already seen. Number 16, the footage the Air Force couldn't explain. The B-52 interior scenes were filmed on an exact replica of a real B-52 cockpit. This created a problem. The B-52 Stratofortress was classified military equipment. Detailed specifications about its interior configuration, instrument panels, and equipment layouts were restricted information. Kubrick's production team built their replica using photographs from aviation magazines and consultations with former Strategic Air Command personnel. When Air Force intelligence officers saw production stills, they launched an investigation. How did a British film production obtain accurate details about classified aircraft systems? The investigation focused on Ken Adams' set construction crew. 3 members were former Royal Air Force personnel with security clearances. 2 had American contacts from Joint North Atlantic Treaty Organization exercises. The Air Force concluded that classified information had probably been leaked but couldn't identify the specific source. No charges were filed. The replica cockpit remained in use. Years later, Boeing engineers who had worked on the actual B-52 program visited the set and were astonished. They had gotten everything right except for the position of one toggle switch. Number 15. The actor who played 3 roles because another actor broke. Peter Sellers was originally contracted to play 4 roles. Group Captain Mandrake, President Muffley, Dr. Strangelove, and Major Kong. The $1 million fee made him the highest paid actor in the world at that time. But during preparation for the Major Kong sequences, Sellers suffered what was officially reported as a sprained ankle. The truth was more complicated. Sellers had experienced something closer to a psychological break. The prospect of performing a 4th character, particularly one requiring a Texas accent he couldn't master, triggered severe anxiety. He began showing up late to fittings. He forgot lines he had memorized the previous day. The production doctor examined him and found nothing physically wrong with his ankle. It was psychosomatic paralysis, a physical manifestation of mental breakdown. Kubrick recognized what was happening. He released Sellers from the Major Kong role and cast Slim Pickens with 1 week's notice. But he kept the truth quiet. The official story became that Sellers' injury prevented him from fitting into the cramped B-52 cockpit set. Nobody mentioned that Sellers had spent 3 days unable to get out of bed, convinced he was dying despite having no actual illness. Number 14. The Pentagon screening. That caused a panic. Before the film's public release, Kubrick arranged a private screening for high-ranking Pentagon officials and Strategic Air Command leadership. The screening took place in December 1963 at a secure facility in Washington. 37 military officers and civilian defense officials watched Dr. Strangelove in complete silence. When the lights came up, nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The ranking officer present, a 3-star general named Thomas Power, who commanded Strategic Air Command, stood and walked out without comment. 3 days later, the Department of Defense sent Kubrick a letter requesting he delay the film's release for national security review. Kubrick refused. The Pentagon's concern wasn't that the film exaggerated nuclear war procedures. It was that the film accurately revealed them. The paranoid general launching an unauthorized strike wasn't fictional madness. It was a documented vulnerability in the command structure. One man with the right access codes could initiate a nuclear war. The Pentagon knew this, Kubrick knew they knew, and now he was about to tell the world. Number 13. The improvised line that became infamous. Peter Sellers improvised most of Dr. Strangelove's dialogue. Kubrick encouraged it, running the camera continuously, while Sellers explored the character. During one take of the final war room scene, Sellers spontaneously delivered the line, "Mein Führer, I can walk." Kubrick kept the camera rolling as Sellers rose from the wheelchair, his right arm jerking into a Nazi salute while his left hand fought to control it. This wasn't in the script. The crew stood frozen, uncertain whether to intervene. Sellers continued improvising, his body fighting itself, the character's repressed Nazi ideology literally bursting through his physical control. When Kubrick finally called cut, the set remained silent for 30 seconds. Then someone started clapping. Kubrick approached Sellers and asked him one question. "Can you do that again exactly the same way?" Sellers tried. Over 17 takes, he attempted to recreate the spontaneous physical comedy. Every version was slightly different. Kubrick used the first take, the genuine improvisation, because it contained something unrepeatable. A moment where Sellers wasn't performing. He had genuinely become this character whose body betrayed his mind. Number 12, the nuclear close call Kubrick didn't know about. On October 25th, 1963, while Kubrick was editing the final scenes, Soviet radar detected what appeared to be an American nuclear missile launch from Turkey. The reading showed 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles inbound toward Moscow. Soviet protocol required an immediate retaliatory strike. Launch codes were distributed to missile commanders. The Soviet premier's nuclear briefcase was activated for the first time in history. An officer named Stanislav Petrov was on duty at the monitoring station. He had 17 minutes to decide whether the readings were genuine. Every system confirmed the attack was real. Every protocol demanded he report an American first strike, which would trigger automatic Soviet retaliation. Petrov looked at the data and made a choice based on instinct rather than procedure. He reported the readings as a false alarm. He was correct. It was a computer malfunction caused by sunlight reflecting off clouds. If Petrov had followed protocol, nuclear war would have started while Kubrick was editing a comedy about accidental nuclear war. The incident wasn't declassified until 1998, when researchers finally revealed how close the world had come to annihilation. They checked the dates. Kubrick had been cutting the final war room scenes the same day. He was editing footage of actors pretending to prevent nuclear war while real officers were actually preventing it. Number 11. The ending that was too dark, even for Kubrick. The film originally ended with a massive pie fight in the war room. Kubrick filmed the sequence over 5 days in September 1963 using 2,000 custard pies. The scenario showed the generals, politicians, and military advisors descending into childish chaos, hurling pies at each other while the world ended. President Muffley took a pie to the face. General Turgayson climbed on the big board, slipping in custard. The Soviet ambassador smashed a pot into Dr. Strangelove's face, prompting his mechanical arm to grab a pie and retaliate. The scene was completely insane, utterly degrading to every authority figure, and according to the actors who performed it, the funniest thing they had ever filmed. Kubrick watched the dailies 3 times. Then he ordered the entire sequence cut from the film. His editor protested. The pie fight was the perfect ending, reducing nuclear war planners to slapstick idiots. Kubrick disagreed. The pie fight was too silly. It would let the audience off the hook. They would laugh and forget the horror. He wanted them to leave the theater with the image of nuclear explosions, not custard. The pie fight footage sat in Warner Brothers vaults for decades. When it was finally screened for film historians in 1999, they agreed with Kubrick's decision. It was hilarious, but it completely destroyed the film's ending. Number 10. The actor Kubrick deliberately humiliated. George C. Scott played General Buck Turgidson as a buffoonish warmonger, but Scott didn't want to play it that way. He saw Turgidson as a serious military professional who happened to favor aggressive nuclear strategy. Kubrick wanted something different. He wanted Turgidson to be almost cartoonish in his militarism. So Kubrick employed a technique he would later perfect on other films. He lied to his actor. For each scene, Kubrick would film several takes with Scott playing the character seriously, exactly as Scott interpreted him. Then Kubrick would ask for one more take, just for practice, where Scott could go bigger, more exaggerated, more comedic. Scott, believing these exaggerated takes were just warm-ups or rehearsals, let himself be ridiculous. He did pratfalls. He delivered lines with absurd bombast. He made funny faces. Then filming would wrap and Kubrick would thank him. In the editing room, Kubrick used exclusively the exaggerated takes Scott believed were rehearsals. Every ridiculous moment, every over-the-top gesture, every buffoonish line. Reading made it into the final film. Scott didn't discover this until the premiere. He sat in the theater, watching himself perform as a clown when he had tried to create a serious character. He confronted Kubrick afterward. "You betrayed me." Kubrick's response was simple. "I used your best performances." Scott refused to work with Kubrick ever again. Number 9. The plane that never existed. The B-52 exterior shots in the film show an aircraft that doesn't match any actual B-52 variant. Aviation experts noticed immediately. The tail configuration was wrong. The engine nacelles were incorrectly positioned. The overall proportions were off. This wasn't because Kubrick lacked access to accurate references. It was deliberate obfuscation. The Air Force had explicitly refused to cooperate with the production because the script portrayed Strategic Air Command in a negative light. Without military cooperation, Kubrick couldn't film real B-52s, but he also couldn't build an exact replica without violating military secrets. The solution was to create a Frankenplane, combining elements from stock footage of various aircraft, adding fictional components, and relying on the audience's vague familiarity with what a bomber should look like. The result fooled most viewers, but drove aviation consultants crazy. Letters poured into aviation magazines pointing out every technical impossibility. Kubrick never responded to the criticism. 30 years later, a former production assistant revealed the truth. The inaccuracies were insurance. If the film showed a perfect B-52, the Air Force could claim classified information had been stolen. An imperfect bomber was legal. Kubrick had created plausible deniability through deliberate error. Number 8. The translation that almost started a diplomatic crisis. When Dr. Strangelove was released in the Soviet Union in 1965, the official state translation altered significant portions of the dialogue. The Soviet censors changed President Muffley's conciliatory phone conversation with Premier Kissoff. In the original English, Muffley apologizes and tries to prevent escalation. In the Russian version, Muffley threatens and demands. The character of Ambassador de Sadetsky, played as reasonable and concerned in the original, became a buffoon in the Russian dubbing. Most significantly, Dr. Strangelove's Nazi tendencies were downplayed while his connections to American capitalism were emphasized. Soviet audiences saw a completely different film, one that portrayed Americans as exclusively warmongering and irrational. When Western diplomats in Moscow saw the altered version, they reported back to Washington. The State Department considered filing a formal protest about the unauthorized changes. Then someone pointed out that protesting edits to a satirical film about nuclear war might make the situation worse. The protest was never filed. 2 different versions of Dr. Strangelove circulated during the Cold War, each confirming the worst suspicions of its respective audience. Kubrick knew about the Soviet changes but never commented publicly. Privately, he told colleagues it proved his point. Everyone sees what they want to see, even in satire. Number 7. The hotline that didn't exist yet. The famous phone conversation between President Muffley and Premier Kissoff takes place on the Moscow-Washington hotline, the direct communication link established after the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's only one problem. When Kubrick filmed that scene in May 1963, the hotline didn't exist yet. The Cuban Missile Crisis had occurred in October 1962. The agreement to establish a direct communication link was signed in June 1963. But the actual hotline wasn't operational until August 1963, 3 months after Kubrick filmed Muffley's phone call. Kubrick had invented a technology that was simultaneously obvious and non-existent. The scene showed what should have existed, what everyone assumed existed, but what hadn't actually been built yet. When the real hotline became operational, Pentagon communications officers who had seen the film reportedly joked that they should have consulted Kubrick on the design. The protocol for using the real hotline bore unsettling similarities to Muffley's phone call. Calm tone, careful word choice, translator assistance. Kubrick had imagined something so logical that reality conformed to his imagination. Number 6. The medical condition Kubrick weaponized. Peter Sellers suffered from a heart condition that caused occasional chest pains and shortness of breath. Kubrick knew about this. During the filming of Dr. Strangelove's most intense scenes, when the character becomes increasingly manic and out of control, Kubrick would deliberately schedule long, exhausting takes. Sellers would perform for 12, 15, sometimes 20 minutes continuously without breaks. The physical strain was enormous. Sellers would emerge from these takes sweating, gasping, clutching his chest. A doctor was kept on standby. Several times, filming stopped while Sellers recovered, but Kubrick kept pushing for one more take. One more improvisation, one more push beyond Sellers' physical limits. The exhaustion and genuine medical distress visible in Sellers' final performances as Strangelove aren't entirely acting. Sellers is genuinely struggling. His body is actually failing. The character's loss of control mirrors the actor's loss of control. Years later, Sellers suffered a series of heart attacks that eventually killed him in 1980 at age 54. Friends who visited him during his final illness said he occasionally mentioned Kubrick. He blamed the director for pushing him too hard, for exploiting his medical condition for cinematic effect. Whether this contributed to his heart disease is medically unknowable, but Sellers believed it, and he never forgave Kubrick for turning his suffering into performance. Number 5. The bomb that became a toy. The nuclear bomb that Major Kong rides to its target was a meticulously accurate replica of an actual Mark 28 thermonuclear weapon. The production's military consultants provided specifications, the dimensions, the weight distribution, the attachment points for the aircraft's bomb bay. Everything was correct except for the nuclear physics package inside. When the prop department completed the bomb, they realized it was essentially perfect. So perfect that storing it on the Shepperton Studios backlot created a problem. What if someone photographed it and used those photographs to aid enemy weapons programs? The British Ministry of Defense sent officers to examine the prop. They confirmed it was accurate enough to be useful for intelligence purposes. They requested it be destroyed after filming. Kubrick refused. The bomb became a piece of set decoration that appeared in other films. It was rented out to different productions. For decades, that prop bomb traveled between studios, appearing in various movies and television shows. Somewhere in a London prop warehouse, that replica of a nuclear weapon probably still exists. Number 4, the Coca-Cola conspiracy that never happened. In the war room scene, General Turgidson complains that Premier Kissoff will see the big board, prompting President Muffley to respond, "He'll see everything. He'll see the big board." In early script drafts, this exchange continued with Turgidson worrying specifically about Coca-Cola's secret formula. The Coca-Cola company somehow learned about this planned reference. Their legal department contacted Kubrick's production company with a threat. If Dr. Strangelove suggested Coca-Cola's formula was stored in military facilities or implied any connection between the company and nuclear warfare, they would sue for defamation. Kubrick responded by making the reference even more prominent. He drafted new scenes showing Coca-Cola machines in the war room. He wrote dialogue about how the secret formula was more closely guarded than nuclear codes. Coca-Cola escalated their threats. Kubrick escalated his script. This continued for 3 weeks, with Coca-Cola becoming increasingly frantic and Kubrick becoming increasingly amused. Finally, Kubrick's lawyers convinced him that Coca-Cola might actually have grounds for a lawsuit. Number 3, the line that nearly got the film banned. Dr. Strangelove's original release date was scheduled for late November 1963. Then on November 22nd, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Columbia Pictures immediately postponed the release. But the assassination created a bigger problem. One of Slim Pickens' improvised lines in the B-52 cockpit was, "A fella could have a pretty good weekend in Dallas with all that stuff." The line referenced the survival kit contents and was filmed months before the assassination. But now, Dallas had become synonymous with presidential murder. Test audiences who saw advanced screenings after the assassination gasped audibly at the line. Some walked out. Columbia executives demanded Kubrick remove it. Kubrick agreed, but he faced a technical problem. The line was part of continuous dialogue in a medium shot. Cutting it would create an obvious edit. Kubrick's solution was to bring Pickens back for a single afternoon to re-record one word. The line became, "A fella could have a pretty good weekend in Vegas with all that stuff." The edit is nearly invisible, only the audio changes. Pickens' mouth clearly formed the word Dallas, but the soundtrack says Vegas. Number 2, the real doomsday machine. Dr. Strangelove's doomsday device, triggered automatically by nuclear attack and impossible to disarm, seems like absurdist fiction. It's not. While Kubrick was filming, Soviet engineers were developing something remarkably similar called dead hand or perimeter. The system was designed to automatically launch a massive nuclear counterstrike if Soviet leadership was killed in a surprise attack. Sensors would detect nuclear explosions on Soviet territory. Computer systems would check for communication from political and military leadership. If nobody responded, the system would assume leadership was dead and automatically launch every remaining nuclear weapon at predetermined targets. The system was built specifically to create unacceptable consequences for an American first strike. The Soviets wanted American war planners to know that even if they successfully killed every Soviet leader, the missiles would still launch automatically. Dead Hand became operational in 1985. It remains operational today. When Cold War historians finally learned about Dead Hand's existence, they immediately recognized it. Kubrick had imagined the doomsday machine in 1963. Number 1. The secret Kubrick kept until he died. Stanley Kubrick maintained for his entire life that Dr. Strangelove was satire, that he had exaggerated nuclear war planning for comedic effect. He gave interviews describing the extensive research he had conducted, the military consultants he had hired, the realistic details he had incorporated. But he always emphasized that the film's central premise, an insane general launching unauthorized nuclear war, was fictional hyperbole. This was a lie. In 1998, 15 years after Kubrick's death, the Air Force declassified documents revealing that in February 1961, General Thomas Power, commander of Strategic Air Command, had indeed pre-delegated nuclear launch authority to lower-ranking officers. If communication with Washington was lost, these officers could order nuclear strikes on their own judgment. This was the exact scenario in Dr. Strangelove. When researchers cross-referenced dates, they discovered something stunning. Dr. Strangelove endures because it accomplished something. Unique in cinema history, it told the truth by claiming to lie. Kubrick presented documented reality and called it satire. He revealed actual nuclear war planning and called it comedy. He showed the world how close it lived to annihilation and made everyone laugh so they wouldn't panic. The brilliant deception was making people believe he had exaggerated when he had barely altered the truth at all.